All right, great to be back together again. So I remember we finished up on 7, so we're going to hit the ground running with letter 8 for us tonight. I have to get out of this so I can put us up with John. For you. Okay, there we are. Okay, well, not there yet. Wait a minute. Make it easy, right? There we go. All right. Stop. Letter 8.
Letter 8.
Oh, it won't stop, will it? Okay, let's get this going.
My dear Wormwood, so you have great hopes that the patient's religious phase is dying away, have you? I always thought the training college had gone to pieces since they put old Slubgob at the head of it. Now I'm sure, has no one ever told you about the law of undulation? Humans are amphibians, half spirit and half animals. The enemy's determination to produce such a revolting hybrid was one of the things that determined our father to withdraw his support from him. As spirits, they belong to the eternal world, but as animals, they inhabit time. This means that while their spirit can be directed to an eternal object, their bodies, passions, and imaginations are in continual change, for to be in time means to change. Their nearest approach to constancy, therefore, is undulation, the repeated return to a level from which they repeatedly fall back, a series of troughs and peaks. If you had watched your patient carefully, you would have seen this undulation in every department of his life. His interest in his work, his affection for his friends, his physical appetites all go up and down. As long as he lives on earth, periods of emotional and bodily richness and liveliness will alternate with periods of numbness and poverty. The dryness and dullness through which your patient is now going are not, as you fondly suppose, your workmanship. They are merely a natural phenomenon which will do us no good unless you make a good use of it. To decide what the best use of it is, you must ask what use the enemy wants to make of it and then do the opposite. Now, it may surprise you to learn that in his efforts to get permanent possession of a soul, he relies on the troughs even more than on the peaks. Some of his special favorites have gone through longer and deeper troughs than anyone else. The reason is this. To us, a human is primarily food. Our aim is the absorption of its will into ours, the increase of our own area of selfhood at its expense. But the obedience which the enemy demands of men is quite a different thing. One must face the fact that all the talk about his love for men and his service being perfect freedom is not, as one would gladly believe, mere propaganda, but an appalling truth. He really does want to fill the universe with a lot of loathsome little replicas of himself, creatures whose life on its miniature scale will be qualitatively like his own, not because he has absorbed them, but because their wills freely conform to his. We want cattle who can finally become food. He wants servants who can finally become sons. We want to suck in. He wants to give out. We are empty and would be filled. He is full and flows over. Our war aim is a world in which our Father below has drawn all other beings into himself. The enemy wants a world full of beings united to him but still distinct. And that is where the troughs come in. You must have often wondered why the enemy does not make more use of his power to be sensibly present to human souls in any degree he chooses and at any moment. But you now see that the irresistible and the indisputable are the two weapons which the very nature of his scheme forbids him to use. Merely to override a human will, as his felt presence in any but the faintest and most mitigated degree would certainly do, would be for him useless. He cannot ravish, he can only woo. For his ignoble idea is to eat the cake and have it. The creatures are to be one with him, and yet themselves. Merely to cancel them or assimilate them would not serve. He is prepared to do a little overriding at the beginning. He will set them off with communications of his presence, which, though faint, seem great to them, with emotional sweetness and easy conquest over temptation. But he never allows this state of affairs to last long. Sooner or later, he withdraws, if not in fact, at least from their conscious experience, all those supports and incentives. He leaves the creature to stand up on its own legs, to carry out from the will alone duties which have lost all relish. It is during such trough periods, much more than during the peak periods, that it is growing into the sort of creature he wants it to be. Hence, the prayers offered in the state of dryness are those which please him best. Well, we can drag our patients along by continual tempting because we design them only for the table, and the more their will is interfered with, the better. He cannot tempt to virtue as we do to vice. He wants them to learn to walk, and must therefore take away his hand. And if only the will to walk is really there, he is pleased even with their stumbles. Do not be deceived. Our cause is never more in danger than when a human, no longer desiring, but still intending to do our enemy's will, looks round upon a universe from which every trace of him seems to have vanished, and asks why he has been forsaken, and still obeys. But, of course, the troughs afford opportunities to our side also. Next week, I shall give you some hints on how to exploit them. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape.
All right. So much in this one. I guess there's so much in all of them, right? You just keep going by.
Turn your video off. It looks like there's a little skeleton in the background of your.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know what it was, but I was like, what is that?
It's showing up right now?
When you were, but while your video was off, whatever, I'm not sure what you're doing. You cover it or you're.
Yeah, I got a little door that shuts on it.
Yeah, it looks like there's a little skeleton really faint in the shadow of the cover.
That's kind of appropriate, isn't it?
Yeah, really weird.
All right, you have heard me talk about the law of undulation in a sermon or two along the way. I resonated with that long before I read Screwtape letters. That's because C.S. Lewis brings that up or points to that in other writings that he has. So it is an affirmation of a pattern that you and I both know. I mean, this is where everything is going great. And we've come up with phrases like, I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because we know everything's going great, but we are fearful or anticipating when the bottom drops out. Because it's always going to happen. We're gonna ride on the top for a while, and then we're gonna go down, and we're gonna be at the bottom, then we're gonna go back up again. It's just a pattern. It just works. It happens sometimes in big ways, and otherwise it happens in little ways. So Lewis is just calling our attention, or Screwtape is just calling our attention to it. I like, did you catch that little nasty interplay at the beginning where he says, or he insults the leader of the training college. At the very beginning, he says,
Love gob.
yes, I've always thought the training college had gone to pieces since they put old Slubgoth at the head of it, and now I am sure. So that will come back later to haunt him. So just put like a little checkbox by that one and hang on to it in the back of your head.
What's it supposed to be about?
He just insults the head of the training college and it was a demon named Slubgob. And it's a little passing thing here, but it'll come back later on. So it's just, kind of forgettable at this moment, but later on we're going to go, oh, I remember that Slubgob. So we'll have to call that up to our mind. All right, how about anything else jump out at you? Anything you can remember? Went through it pretty quick.
Say, how can we ever win the race? We've got the devil who can do anything he wants to lead us down the wrong path, and yet then he says, our God in heaven cannot.
Yeah.
It's the same. I don't know, in the same vein. So it seems like we're doomed.
Well, that is, excuse me, that is the answer to the question is, why do we need Jesus? When Jesus came, he said, the things that you need to do to save yourself, you can't do. And so if you left to your own devices, you're never going to make it. So I had to come so that I can not only take on the sin that you can't overcome, but also so I can leave you with the tools so that from now on you'll have the defense and you'll be able to persevere over what Satan and your nature are trying to do to you. So
although he does give us a little hope of the last sentence.
Yes.
Our cause is never more in danger than when a human, no longer desiring but intending to do God, that our enemies will look around upon a universe from which every trace of him seems to have vanished, and asks why he has been forsaken and still obeys.
Yes. And does that ring a bell? Of course, the primary example of that is Jesus from the cross saying, Father, why have you forsaken me? He's still completely left and bereft and alone, but yet still following and still having faith. Earlier on, he talks about that when he says, this is on the, let's see, page 38 in my book. It's the third full paragraph and 3/4 of the way down. He says, he relies on the troughs even more than the peaks. Some of his special favorites have gone through longer and deeper troughs than anyone else. So many of the saints fall into this category, not the least of which is a guy named John of the Cross. And he was a monk who had this long period of absolute just bereft of God. So he wrote two treatises to his brethren. One is called The Ascent of Mount Carmel. It's very poetic, where he's talking about, climbing, living your life, climbing toward God, seeking after God and rising up the mountain closer to God. And the next installment is called The Dark Night of the Soul. So he says, when you get to a certain point within your spiritual journey, frequently God just like shuts everything down, turns off the light, so that all of the closeness that you felt and the dependence that you have and the joy that you've got and the recognition that you know that God's there all the time, you can feel God present, is just gone. And you can't feel anything, and you don't have that inspiration anymore. You just don't have it. So what do you do? So he's writing this book to tell the brethren, why this is happening and what do you do when it does, and how do you live through it? It is a very beloved treatise. One of the last interviews that Mother Teresa had, which was, I think it was like maybe 18 months before she died. She was in Calcutta at her convent there, and she admitted to the interviewer that she had she was in her dark night, and she had been for years. So that's not unusual for the saints, and in the Middle Ages would say that. But you think about how you don't feel God's presence anymore. You don't know God to be there. There's no palpable relationship you have with God at all. And yet you keep doing everything as if you did. That's exactly what Mother Teresa did. She was still the mother of her order. She still led all her nuns. She still did all her work in Calcutta. She still did her prayers and led her services and everything, but she didn't feel the presence of God with her at all. The dark night of the soul can be a devastating, really, challenging, hard, horrible time. And that's why he's saying here, some of his special favorites have gone through longer and deeper troughs than anyone else. That's horrible to experience. But the point is well taken, that it is an example to everybody else that feeling the presence of God. A long time ago, we used to talk a lot about feelings. We don't do it so much anymore, thankfully. But there was this real reliance in Christianity for a long time on feeling. And feelings are completely unreliable. They're great. I mean, I like them. Feelings are cool, right? But at different times in our lives, they've gotten us into nothing but trouble and caused nothing but problems. And it's not because we weren't in control of ourselves. We were, and we were responding and reacting to how we felt. And it was awful. The outcome was awful. We've all had the awful outcome. Even if it's just young love, you fell in love head over heels over somebody in school, and she or he never cared about you at all, and you were just devastated, tore your heart out, and maybe didn't want to drink your milk anymore, and it was just awful. I mean, it was just terrible because you had this feeling, and we carry that forward into everything. When we buy things, I really need that. I'm really going to have that. It's going to be great. You've got this build up to buying the thing because it's going to make you happy. You've created this happy aura around yourself, predicated on the acquisition of this thing. And this has led us to the creation of the term buyer's remorse. Buyer's remorse isn't just, oops, I shouldn't have spent the money. Buyer's remorse comes about when we get the thing. Sometimes it happens just like that right away. You know this. It arrives at the house, you open the box.
Why did I get this?
Yeah.
What am I doing with this?
It's gone. Because I think at that point, when we finally have it, we realize it's not going to satisfy me the way that I had pumped myself up to believe it would. I was living in my feeling and not living on the rational reality of my head. So this type of thing takes Christians away from the feeling. It says you cannot rely on your feelings about God, and you can't rely on feeling God and feeling loved by God and loving God and having God around. You can't do that because sometimes it's not going to happen. And if loving God and being loved by God is only the way I feel about God, I'm in big trouble, because there's going to be points, just regular points, troughs in my life, and then maybe divinely given periods of the dark night where I don't feel the great stuff about God at all. What am I going to do then? Am I going to say, oh, well, it's not for me. I guess I goofed. I should go do something else. Or are you going to stick in there? And if you depend just on the feelings, you have no chance. So that's why he wants that. Okay, let's see. I like the whole thing, but humans are primarily food. Later on, Lewis
It says good instead of food. So is
Yeah,
it
typo.
good? To us, a human is primarily good.
That's what threw me too, but I think it's just a typo.
It's supposed to be food.
it's food, yeah.
Okay.
Does it say primarily good in yours?
In our copy, it does, yeah.
Wow.
I noticed that in a couple of the other letters, there's some typos that but fundamentally change the sentence, what the sentence is trying to say.
No, it's primarily food.
Yeah,
And other places,
okay.
Lewis would say that it's one of those situations where you're consumed, but you're never fully consumed. So your soul, your spirit's being sucked out of you and consumed, but when they're done consuming, you still have more to give. And so you're eternally being sucked dry, never stops, never get to the end of it. So it's this eternal thing.
That be enjoyable in any way? How could
No.
people choose to stay there? I mean, it sounds horrendous.
Yeah, it's pretty ugly.
Even for somebody, even for somebody that's sitting for, on Earth, that just doesn't sound like it's something.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's possible, isn't it? In relationships on Earth, to have somebody who's a taker,
Mm.
and just always taking. And especially again, if you go back to that place where I'm in love, I admire, I care for, and this other person's a taker, and it's just constantly sucking the love out of me all the time. But because I'm trying to be faithful, I'm continuing to rely upon and renew and reinvigorate the love that I feel, which is constantly being drawn off all the time. And the result is, it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. It's just emotionally and spiritually devastating for people. You can imagine having that happen for eternity. Holy smokes. This is going to come back to later on too. So we got Slub Gob, remember him. This little section right here where he says, one must face the facts that all the talk about his love for men and his service being perfect freedom is not, as one would gladly believe, mere propaganda, but the appalling truth. He really does want to fill the universe with lots of loathsome little replicas of himself, creatures whose life and mature scale will be quantitatively like his. That's going to come back later on, that whole little section right there, and cause some serious problem, I think, around letter 28, 25, something like that. So remember that one. He wants to make us empty, would be filled. So this whole thing, this juxtaposition, he wants to suck in, we want to suck in, he wants to give out. We are empty and be full, he's full and overflows. Our Father's aim is to take them all into himself. He wants them all to be united in him, but yet distinct. So there's no the loss of individuality. All of the compliments of God here is that God's constantly giving, not taking at all. It's all about giving. And then, but the issue then is for us is, are we prepared, or do we even want to receive? Yeah. It's amazing to me. I think back on my life, and you probably can do this too, where I have gone to a party, maybe melancholy or lethargic when I went, and I'm at the party, and it's a good party. I'm having a good time. I'm there. It's okay. It's not too loud. It's not too quiet. Music's all right. People are having a good time. And there's this little place in me where I could have a good time, or I could force myself not to. It's either way it's going to go. And there certainly were times where I just kind of decided I wanted to be unhappy, and I wasn't going to receive the good feelings and good time that I could from this event. I just wasn't going to do it. And so I blocked it and wouldn't take it. If I just said, I don't care about it, it would have been great. I had a great time at the party. And the worst part of if you did it when you're with somebody, because then you wreck their time too, don't you? I remember doing that. Well, it's also terrible, awful thing to do. Drag your friends into this stuff. This business about being irresistible and indispensable, goes back to freedom of will, free will. God does not make us love him, make us love God. God does not force us into relationship. God calls us and invites us and loves us and waits for us and is faithful. I think he does a wonderful job here, really putting that into a great description of how God is and what God does. I'm sure you guys this all makes sense to you. This whole thing about the communications at the beginning when you feel God and God's like really great and you're like God's there, but then it just kind of drifts away, just goes away. All right here, we used to call that in the spiritual retreats I did for Curcia, we called the mountaintop experience. Everybody you'd go to the retreat and you'd have this epiphany about God, and it would be just fantastic, and you're up on this mountaintop, but you can't stay there. You got to go back in the valley, and when you get back in the valley, slowly, it just wears off. And pretty soon, the mountaintop experience is no longer a feeling; it's just a memory. So if you're depending on the feeling and not the memory, then you'll also not just lose the feeling, you'll just drift away from the church or from the group or from the event, just because you're not sustained. Yeah. We drag our patients along by continual temptation. He cannot tempt to virtue as we are to vice. Yeah. Next week, I'll give you who withdraws. Desire versus intention, how different is the thing. Yeah. All right. Anything in there? Anything else in there? Good stuff.
It's good that it's just so much, it's hard for anything to stick out.
Yeah.
There's so many layers here.
Yeah.
For me.
We did, I think it's probably 15 years ago when we did one. I think we came back to letter 8. I've got all these notes at the top from different periods. And I think we came back to this one over and over again because it's kind of a core. It's got a lot of core stuff in it that can keep you reflecting. And that, remember, that's the whole point of Screwtape, is to hear this stuff and to find ourselves in it and then reflect on that. Now that I know that it's not just me the way I feel, if this is really a contrived process, then I'm not going to play anymore. You know, I'm not gonna live this outcome anymore, because now I know it, I see it, I can understand it, and I'm gonna overcome it. All right, ready to go to 9?
Sure.
Okay, let's see, where are we here? Let's see. Nope, that's wrong. Yeah, that's right. There we are. Of course.
Letter 9. My dear Wormwood, I hope my last letter has convinced you that the trough of dullness or dryness through which your patient is going at present will not, of itself, give you his soul, but needs to be properly exploited. What forms the exploitation should take, I shall now consider. In the first place, I have always found that the trough periods of the human undulation provide excellent opportunities for all sensual temptations, particularly those of sex. This may surprise you, because, of course, there is more physical energy and therefore more potential appetite at the peak periods. But you must remember that the powers of resistance are then also at their highest. The health and spirits which you want to use in producing lust can also, alas, be very easily used for work or play or thought or innocuous merriment. The attack has a much better chance of success when the man's whole inner world is drab and cold and empty. And it is also to be noted that the trough sexuality is subtly different in quality from that of the peak, much less likely to lead to the milk and water phenomenon which the humans call being in love, much more easily drawn into perversions, much less contaminated by those generous and imaginative and even spiritual concomitants which often render human sexuality so disappointing. It is the same with other desires of the flesh. You are much more likely to make your man a sound drunkard by pressing drink on him as an anodyne when he is dull and weary, than by encouraging him to use it as a means of merriment amongst his friends when he is happy and expansive. Never forget that when we are dealing with any pleasure in its healthy and normal and satisfying form, we are, in a sense, on the enemy's ground. I know we have won many a soul through pleasure. All the same, It is his invention, not ours. He made the pleasures. All our research so far has not enabled us to produce one. All we can do is to encourage the humans to take the pleasures which our enemy has produced at times or in ways or in degrees which he has forbidden. Hence, we always try to work away from the natural condition of any pleasure to that in which it is least natural, least redolent of its maker, and least pleasurable. An ever-increasing craving for an ever-diminishing pleasure is the formula. It is more certain, and it's better style. To get the man's soul and give him nothing in return, that is what really gladdens our Father's heart. And the troughs are the time for beginning the process. But there is an even better way of exploiting the trough. I mean, through the patient's own thoughts about it. As always, the first step is to keep knowledge out of his mind. Do not let him suspect the law of undulation. Let him assume that the first ardors of his conversion might have been expected to last and ought to have lasted forever, and that his present dryness is an equally permanent condition. Having once got this misconception well fixed in his head, you may then proceed in various ways. It all depends on whether your man is of the desponding type, who can be tempted to despair, or of the wishful thinking type, who can be assured that all is well. The former type is getting rare amongst the humans. If your patient should happen to belong to it, everything is easy. You have only got to keep him out of the way of experienced Christians, an easy task nowadays, to direct his attention to the appropriate passages in Scripture, and then to set him to work on the desperate design of recovering his old feelings by sheer willpower, and the game is ours. If he is of the more hopeful type, your job is to make him acquiesce in the present low temperature of his spirit and gradually become content with it, persuading himself that it is not so low after all. In a week or two, you will be making him doubt whether the first days of his Christianity were not perhaps a little excessive. Talk to him about moderation in all things. If you can once get into the point of thinking that religion is all very well up to a point, you can feel quite happy about his soul. A moderated religion is as good for us as no religion at all, and more amusing. Another possibility is that of a direct attack on his faith. When you've caused him to assume that the trough is permanent, can you not persuade him that his religious phase is just going to die away like all his previous phases? Of course, there's no conceivable way of getting by reason from the proposition, I am losing interest in this, to the proposition, this is false. But, as I said before, it's jargon, not reason, you must rely on. The mere word phase will very likely do the trick. I assume that the creature has been through several of them before. They all have. And that he always feels superior and patronizing to the ones he has emerged from. Not because he's really criticized them, but simply because they are in the past. You keep him well fed on hazy ideas of progress and development and the historical point of view, I trust, and give him lots of modern biographies to read. These people in them, they're always emerging from phases, aren't they? So you see the idea? Keep his mind off the plain antithesis between true and false. Nice, shadowy expressions. It was a phase. I've been through all that. And don't forget the blessed word, adolescent. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape.
All right. Another great one, eh? There are some questions that have to be asked. First, did you hear anything you want to center on as we start off? Just roll into it. So about that first section, all about sex, right? Which is all sensual stuff.
Yeah.
So he says, the attack has a much better chance of success when a man's whole inner world is drab and cold and empty. Why?
If you have nothing, you'll grab for anything.
Yes. Beautiful. Thank you, sir. Everything that you get, anything that you can get, if you know that that place that we go to when we say we're feeling depressed or down, and we say, if only I could, everything would be all right. So what is that? It could be anything. It could be something that's good for me, or it could be something that's not good for me. That I make a hinge pin to reorienting the world for myself. Here, Screwtape specifically talking about sensual temptations and sex. But again, he goes on to alcohol as a possibility. Anything's a possibility. If only I could get out with friends. But then the person gets out with friends and they get drunk because they're so depressed. And then that becomes a part of what they do. And then pretty soon you have a big problem. Okay, another one says, and it's also to be noted that the trough sexuality is subtly different in quality from the peak, much less likely to lead to the milk and water phenomenon, which the humans call being in love, and more easily drawn into perversions, much less contaminated by those generous, imaginative, and even spiritual accompaniments, which often render human sexuality so disappointing. So when it says drawn into perversions, why? Why would that be an impetus for the person to be drawn into some perverse way of behaving? It's the idea that, or the belief of the individual that more is better. That if I just get enough of whatever it is I want, then it'll get me out of this stage. I won't feel this way anymore. I'll feel better. Everything will be all right.
But then it's never enough.
It's never enough. And so when you get to the place where it's just this good, the next time you get to it, you don't get the same thing from it. So you have to go to this place. And the next time it's this place. This in a very, we've all experienced this in one way or another, but this is exactly the pattern of alcohol and drug addiction.
Mhm.
I have an acquaintance right now. He's what we call a functioning alcoholic. So he starts drinking probably 20 minutes from when he gets up in the morning.
Good Lord.
Yeah. And he drinks all day long, and he drinks everything. So when I was with him, I slept in. I was like 9 o'clock. I got up. He was in the living room he watches the finance page and politics page, and he loves watching that on TV. He's got 2 flat screen televisions with this stuff going all the time. And I go in the kitchen and get a cup of coffee, and I come back out, and it's like 9 o'clock, and he's drinking a beer. I'm like, oh, okay. All right. So I asked him, "There's something to eat?" He says, "Yeah, he got some sausage and stuff in the kitchen." So I go in to get that. I came back out, and he's got a low ball, drinking bourbon.
9 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. He had 2 or 3 more beers before lunch, and with lunch he had wine. And
Yeah.
it's that way all day long. I mean, he's not just drinking one thing.
He's just all over the place.
It doesn't bother him.
He probably doesn't even know any better.
Yeah. Well,
At this point, he just whatever. It's here. I'm drinking it.
Well, there's a time when he had 5. Absolutely, we all know this. There was a time when he had 5 beers, and that was enough. He was crashed. And then when he had 10 beers, it wasn't enough. So then he had 2 low balls, and he was trashed. But then it wasn't that. So it had to kept going up and up and up. So when he became an alcoholic, can you imagine me drinking 5 beers and then 2 low balls of bourbon and then a glass of wine? Not only
I haven't had 5 beers in the last 12 months. Maybe longer.
Mm-hmm.
Not only would we be out of it, but we'd be throwing up. I mean,
Yes.
mix alcohol like that. It just,
Be in bed with a hangover for days,
oh
probably.
my
Oh
God.
my gosh.
And
Misery.
he doesn't. He does. If he does, It's that old thing, little hair of the dog that bit you. Remember that?
Yeah,
If he
that's that guy.
if he does have a hangover, he drinks himself through it.
It sounds like he probably doesn't ever have hangover because he never sobers up.
It could be.
I mean, honestly, his
No.
body just never goes into that state.
I've watched this for years, and what I realized is it's just that bar is just getting moved up. You can't get enough the next time.
So the bar gets lower every year because we drink less and then we don't need as much.
Right. That's right. We're the opposite. We got the opposite going on. So the reason why they're drawn into perversions in this section here is because the thing that made me happy last time is not doing it for me this time. So I've got to up the ante. The next time it's going to be something more to something more to something more, and then I'm kind of lost in it. Never forget that when we're dealing with any pleasure in its healthy and normal and satisfying form, we are in a sense in the enemy's ground. So this is a wonderful admission that the pleasures of life that he says right here, we can't make any pleasures. We've tried, but we can't make a pleasure. All the pleasures belong to God. God wants us to be happy, to have pleasures in our life, to feel good. What Screwtapes is all about is taking the pleasures and pushing them to the extreme where they become bad. Taking them to a point, he's just warping everything. Everything that's good, he's bending it back around on itself to make it bad. Everything in excess is bad. It's not. It's things in moderation are correct. This is why I say you can get this happened in, I must have been 20 DC in the summer, and one of my friends, I think it was Bill Warshauer, Mike Wormack or Bill Warshauer, got water poisoning. They drank so much water.
Too much water.
Yeah.
Heard of that.
I thought it was a joke.
No,
It's
just
not.
your body can't handle any more water, and it actually poisons itself.
Yeah. You dilute your system. You dilute all the stuff out of your system.
Yeah.
So think water will save you in the desert, but obviously too much water can really cause you a lot of problems. Anything in excess can be turned into a bad thing. Even the things we can't imagine would be bad.
There's actually an airman in basic training for the Air Force some years ago that drank so much water he died.
Yeah, see?
He died for drinking too much water.
Hard to believe, but a great image for us when Screwtape's talking here. It's exactly what he's talking about. Anything good can be made bad if you get too much of it. Okay, let's see. Let's see. Hence, we always try to work away from the natural condition of any pleasures to that in which is the least natural, least redolent of its maker. That's reminiscent of its maker, and least pleasurable. So let's take that again.
Can we go back?
We always work. What?
Let me go back to the other one where there was a word I didn't know.
Okay.
Yeah, lost it. Anodyne.
That is
Much more likely to make your man a sound drunkard by pressing a drink on him as an anodyne
right.
when he is dull and weary than by encouraging him to use it as a means of merriment among friends when he is happy and expanding.
An anodyne is like a it's a great word. It's used in the believe it or not in the 18 or 1900s a lot.
I mean, I can look it up.
It's like a, what's the other word for it? I give a synonym for it. It's
According to Google, it's not likely to provoke dissent or offense, and offensive, often deliberately.
It's a
anodyne.
In this usage, it's like saying that if you let's see, you're less likely to make your man a sound drunkard by pressing a drink on him as an anodyne when he is dull and weary than by encouraging him to use it. So he's feeling like he's down, and so having having a drink right now, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, is okay because it's just a drink. It's not going to hurt me. It's not a bad thing. It'll make me feel a little better because, I just won't, it'll take the edge off. How many times have we heard that in our life? It'll take the edge.
As a pain-killing drug or medicine.
Yeah. Yeah. It's gonna smooth things out for me. It's gonna make it okay. So start drinking at 7 instead of 9 or 5 instead of 7, and then pretty soon it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then you're like my friend at 8 o'clock in the morning. So it's an anodyne is a healing, a tonic. Give him this as it's an excuse. You remember all the shows in the 70s or the 80s where as soon as something bad happened, the guy would say, "I need a drink."
Yeah.
Yes.
And they'd run over and get a drink, and they'd have like a full bar in the office. Do you remember Bewitched?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Remember what Darren used to do whenever he got home? They had a mini bar right there by the bottom of the steps, and he'd go over to the mini bar and take a drink. And whenever something happened, she did something, he'd be like, "Oh, I need a drink," and he'd walk over and get a drink. Like that's an anodyne. That's covering it over as it's got a tonic to make things better. So if I can make the excuse, I deserve it. You're not going to say I don't. I mean, I'm in a hard place. So.
Got it. All right, moving on to wherever you were going.
Okay. It says, we always try to work away from the natural condition of any pleasure, so that in which it is at its least natural, least reminiscent of its maker, and least pleasurable. So we're moving away from the center of the pleasure to where it's least pleasurable. Why would they want to do that? Why would the demon want to get you to go to that place?
So you keep wanting more because you want to get to the correct place.
Yeah, it's not satisfying, which loops us back up to the perversions. Remember, it's less and less satisfying, so I'm going further and further and further to get the same thing I got before, and there can be no end to that.
As it says, an ever-increasing craving for an ever-diminishing pleasure is the formula.
Yeah, brilliant. Then he goes to the next thing. But there's even a better way of exploiting the trough through the patient's own thoughts about it. Do not let him suspect the law of undulation. Let's just get rid of that. Let him assume that the first ardors of his conversion he might have expected to last, than ought to have lasted forever, and that his present dryness is equally permanent. So really, this is just capitalizing on ignorance. Right? Ignorance is not a mean word. Ignorance is not calling someone idiot. If I said, "Alan, you're just ignorant," right? I'm a nuclear scientist, and you're ignorant of nuclear science. That's not a mean thing to say.
I would say you're correct.
Yeah, ignorant just means you don't know. So if someone said you're ignorant about this topic, if I am, I would say, well, teach me. But we hear the word ignorant, we kind of associate it with idiot, and people use it that way, but that's not what an ignorance is. So this is exploiting an ignorance. This is looking at the person who is not real. That's why he says, don't let him think about undulation. Let him remain ignorant to this. Let him not understand it, not see it, not connect it, and then exploit it. Let the false reality of what's happening to him remain a truth to him, but don't ever let him think that it's false. And this is where it comes back to, when we have these issues, we have these problems, when something goes on, I tell people all the time, about every 3 to 4 years, you need to go to a counselor. You need to go talk about your stuff for, 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks. People have no idea how we get off track, because how would you know? How would you know? How do we know we're off track? Because it's us. I mean, I'm on track, right? This is me. You go to a counselor and then you talk to the counselor for a little while, they're like, let me just repeat back to you this one little segment you made. And it's amazing when you think that everything is okay, and then the counselor points it out, and if you're willing to listen, you just think, oh crud, how did that happen? How How did I get to that place? Where did that come from? And then you take the next couple of weeks getting out of that place. So that's just being learning about the self, learning about how I can live myself and understand myself. Right, this thing about wishful thinking. He says, if your patient should happen to belong to it, everything else is easy. You have only to keep him out of the way of experienced Christians. Only had that little laugh, easy nowadays, and direct his attention to the appropriate passages of Scripture. What? So you want to keep him in the church, and the demon is going to direct him toward the Bible. But the qualifying statement before it is keep him out of the companionship of experienced Christians, because you know what proof texting is, right? We're getting so much of it today, it's nauseating. People that grab these little snippets of the Bible, one passage out of the Bible, and they say, this is what it means. And this is supporting my opinion about this, or it's tearing down these people over here about that. And if they really went back and read it, they realize you can't do that with these passages. They don't fit, but they just grab them. Grab a little one here, grab a little one there, grab a little one there. And they always grab the ones that fit what they want. But I've told you this story about the guy who said he wants to kill everybody, right? And I pointed him toward Matthew's gospel where Jesus said, you've heard it said, love your friends and hate your enemies. Well, I'm saying, love your enemies and pray for them. And this guy said, he flat out, he said, well, Bill, I'm sorry, but you must be a really bad priest because you don't know anything about Jesus. Like, what? He said, Jesus never said that. He never said that. He said, eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, no, he didn't say that. That's in the Old Testament. That's not in the New. He said, love your enemies and pray for them. And he said, no, he didn't. So I sent him the scripture. I emailed it to him. I sent him links to Amazon to buy Bibles. I said, you can just go online and look it up. And he don't believe me. He told me, well, it's just in my Bible. I have a made up Bible. Yeah. So I said, go to any Bible you want and look it up. So he had picked a whole bunch of scriptures out of the blue to support everything he liked. And when I, an experienced Christian, pointed him toward other scriptures, it blew his mind. He couldn't do it. And in fact, the horror of that is that after I got back talking with him, since then, it didn't change anything. He still does the same thing. He completely has ignored them like they don't exist. Anything Jesus said, just.
So you're using made up facts, in other words.
Yep, absolutely. All twisted around. So this is what Screwtape is saying, and it's coming true today.
Oh,
This
yeah.
is so blown up in America today with people calling in God about ordaining people to be the people they are and to do things that they're doing. Like, blows my mind. The only way people can do that is if they don't know anything about the scripture. They're just misappropriating little pieces of it and saying this is what it is, and this is what it is, and this is what it is. So yep. Let's see. Set him on to work, desperate design of recovering his old feelings. Remember the feelings? Get him to desire to recover his feelings by sheer willpower. I can do it alone. This is again going to Jesus saying, you can't do it. You can't do it. So he's perfectly within the context of saying, get him away from Jesus, get him away from the God, get him away from the truth, get them to rely upon themselves and think they know what they're doing. It's just brilliant. It's all in there. Okay, let's see. The moderation in all things, right? I said that earlier, too much is too much. But here in the second part, he turns it around. And he says, talk to him about moderation in all things. If he wants you to the point where thinking that religion is very well up to a point, you can feel quite happy about his soul. A moderate religion is as good for us as no religion is all. Why? Well, like this person I talked about, a moderate religion invites errors.
As I say, you get to a point where that's what you believe and nothing's going to change that.
Yeah. Yep.
You just believe what you believe and you go on.
Yeah, that's it. So if it's moderate, if I'm not really interested in doing anything, then I just take what I've got and I just keep it. This is all I got. It's all I need. It supports me, and I'm going to live with that stuff. So it creates a false reality and a corruption that then you live by, like a creed. So that's a good thing. And then he goes into this thing about phases. That's a great one. Say phases and jargon. Did you hear that? But as I said before, it is jargon, not reason you must rely upon. Jargon is that old phrase for a good turn of a phrase, a good turn of a sentence. Keep sounding smart and saying smart things, and your patient will think you're a smart person and just listen to you. And it doesn't matter if you know what you're talking about at all. Just say, you can turn things upside down. It won't make any difference.
Complete nonsense by using smart words.
Yeah. And this happens too. All the time. People listen to people who don't know anything, and they just copy them because they think they know. Okay, we got to stop it. Keep him well fed on hazy ideas of progress and development and the historical point of view. And he says, let's see there, keep his mind off plain antithesis between true and false. Nice shadowy expressions like it was a phase. I've been through all that. And don't forget the blessed word, adolescent. I like the fact he uses the word blessed in there. That's goes back to saying that this is my mom saying holier than thou. When someone thinks that they're better than you are because they've gone through that already, so they're like superior. But what they don't tell you is that when they went through that, it wrecked them. So they don't know any more than you do because they got trashed. But simply because they've already done that, they assume a stance of superiority over you because they've already done it. And if that person's important to you, then you rely upon them as the authority because they've gone through it. Even though you don't know that they went through it badly, they don't know anything more than you do. So it's just putting them back in that place where it says, don't be ardent about this. Don't follow through. Just be moderate. Take as much as you've got and forget the rest. There you go.
The big ones.
A lot in 8 and 9. A lot in 8 and 9. Two big letters from him about just daily life and living and how we get from A to B. So yeah. So next week we're looking at 10, 11, 12. Who knows? We'll see how far we can get. Sound good?
Yep.
All right. You guys have a wonderful, blessed night. I pray you all sleep very, very well.
Okay.
Have a wonderful day tomorrow.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye.
See y'all. Have a good weekend, huh?